It's time now for a look through the papers with Diptyka Laurent. Hello to you, Dipty. Let's start first of all with Zimbabwe, where President Emerson Mnangagwa has returned home, this following violent protests.
That's right. Those protests taking place last week. The president actually chose to skip the World Economic Forum in Davos to come home and deal with the fallout of last week's protests, and in particular the government's deadly crackdown on protesters who were demonstrating against fuel price hikes. Now, late last week, reports emerged of abuses committed by government security forces, including alleged beatings in people's own homes. Amid fears of more protests, the government has deployed security forces in a bid to assure the nation. That's what the Chronicle, a daily Zimbabwean paper, is saying on its front page. That paper is a pro-government paper, and you'll see that editorial line in its editorial today. The paper, as it did last week, continues to blame the protesters for the unrest, calling them, quote, drunken youths with a brazen disregard for authority who attacked police officers and killed one police officer in particular. The paper accusing the opposition of sort of fueling these protests in a bid, they say, to topple the government.
Right, well, Dipty, what about the other editorial pages? What are they saying?
Well, we've been looking at the Herald. That's also a pro-government paper, saying in its editorial today that evil should not prevail over good. The paper saying that people have been fooled into thinking the government is doing nothing to better the economy. These protests, led by the opposition party, the paper says, is sending potential investments up into the smoke as foreign buyers are thoroughly dissuaded from pumping cash into the Zimbabwean economy. Now, on the flip side, for the Standard, that's a private weekly paper, the writing is on the wall, it says, quote, in bold and screaming that President Emerson Mnangagwa and his government have failed to run this economy. Instead of looking for scapegoats, they say the government should be finding solutions.
All right, well, let's move on. Let's stay with the British press, though. The Spice Girls making the front page of The Guardian, but for all the wrong reasons today.
That's right. The paper's actually looking at the sweatshop factory conditions of garment factory workers in Bangladesh who were producing T-shirts designed by the pop group for a charity event last year. Inhumane conditions, impossible targets to meet, 16-hour work days, all this for a T-shirt to promote, ironically, gender equality. A T-shirt that could cost a worker there 1 week's salary. We know that factory worker conditions sparked angry protests in Bangladesh earlier this month and prompted the government to increase wages. But those workers who are more experienced and already earning a bit more than the others say these pay rises don't affect them.
All right, well, staying on the topic of inequality, Libération, the French paper, is looking at the ever-widening gap between rich and poor, and that's all down to a new Oxfam report.
Well, we mentioned the World Economic Forum beginning in Davos today, and on that occasion, the British NGO Oxfam shows this study shows that the 26 richest people in the world hold as much wealth as 3.8 billion people. In other words, pretty much half of humanity. And you see that on the front page of Libération, half of humanity, in fact, is their headline. And they've on all those names are those 26 richest people. Figures that, quote, show the scandalous level of inequality in the world. Libération condemning the situation, saying it goes beyond comprehension. A disconnect so great that, I quote, no fairy tale for children has even been invented for it.
All right, well, still with the French papers, a new poll showing that the level of cyberbullying that young French people are enduring is often very high.
Yeah, and it's very worrying, these figures. This is a report coming from the street paper 20 Minutes showing that 2/3 of young people aged between 20 and 24 have been victims of cyber violence. Pretty shocking figures indicating, for some at least according to this article, how normalized cyber violence is becoming. The most common forms of cyberbullying in order are insults, being mocked, and compromising photos. In fact, the latter, along with revenge porn, are more and more prevalent as forms of online abuse. Women are often victims of sexual harassment. Men are mocked for their physiques or masculinity.
All right, and finally from you, Paris's Paris Men's Fashion Week wrapped up yesterday with a new collection from the French fashion house Jacquemus, inspired by the yellow vests.
Well, it's not every day that we see high fashion, affordability, and the common man sort of all lumped into one group, but I suppose it was a matter of time before we saw the yellow vest influence in fashion. Simon Porte Jacquemus, he's the young creator of the Jacquemus label, says he's, quote, close to the yellow vest protesters, according to this article from the Huffington Post, and that this collection presented yesterday, Sunday, reflects his, quote, provincial roots. It was called Le Meunier, which means the miller in French, and was shown to guests who feasted on bread, juice, croissants, and cheese. They were not seated. There were no seats, actually, at the show, just models who sort of walked around, snaked around the crowd, and then sat at the table themselves to eat their share of the food. His collection featured practical workwear jackets in denim and cotton, utility vests, work shirts, thick fisherman sweaters, and sensible, sturdy white sneakers. He says so he's not capitalizing on the notoriety of the movement. To be fair, his sketches were probably done before the actual movement started.
Well, it does seem like fashion that's a bit more practical than we're used to seeing on the catwalk, certainly at Paris Men's Fashion Week. Dipti, thank you very much for our roundup of the papers there. Don't forget, if you do want to see more, you can always go online to our website at france24.com.